Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. As folks trickle in, I would love for you all to write in the chat where you're calling in from. I see some familiar faces. Hi, Shannon. Hi, Catherine. Hi, Amanda. Hi, new people I haven't met. Philadelphia, Los Angeles. Hello, LA. Good morning. Hello, Brooklyn. Nyack. Yay. I am in San Diego. Hello, hello. So as people trickle in, I just want to say, please allow this talk to be a time for you to rest and take care of yourself in any way that you need. Don't hold your pee, don't be thirsty. Feel free to go off camera when you need to and take care of your needs. Hello, hello. Some more folks are going to trickle in probably till 5 past, and then we will dive in. As you're coming in, please tell us where you're calling in from. San Francisco. Hello. Hi, Kira. Atlanta. Amazing. If you are comfortable turning your camera on, please feel free to do so. I would love to connect with you, and you can feel welcome to be camera off if you are making breakfast. Hi. Hello. Nice to meet you. Hello, Diana. Hello, LA. Wow, we have a Brazil in the house. Amazing. Hello. Thank you so much for being here, and thank yourselves for being here. I'm really excited to start this conversation, and it's a complex topic. So I will share my experience, and there will be a chance to dive into some of your experiences at the end and any questions you have during our Q&A. A few more people trickling in here for the next couple minutes. Tell us where you're calling in from. And for those who were not here when I said it, please take care of yourself during this talk. Please be comfortable and drink water and tea and whatever else you might need. And if you need to jump off early, please do so. If you need to switch to a device where you can walk outside, do so. Amazing. All right. Calling in from LA. We got another Atlanta here. Making some Atlanta connections with each other. All right. Once again, I am here in San Diego, about an hour and a half south of LA, which helps me feel tethered to the industry. New York, I miss you. All right. So welcome, welcome. I am going to dive in. Here we go. One moment. Feel film. Amazing. We are here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Creative Freedom, the power of boundaries in post. Thank you, Blue Collar Post Collective, for having me. So, creating this workshop brought up a lot of stories, and I would love to share one with you. Honestly, I was madly in love, and I was willing to do whatever it took to prove it. I would stay up all night, and one morning I was driving home in my 88 Mazda hatchback with a spontaneously honking horn in standstill LA traffic when my car suddenly and very slowly rear-ended a truck in front of me. I had fallen asleep at the wheel. A man jumped out of the truck, and he wasn't mad. I couldn't believe it. He just asked me if I was okay. And luckily I was. I drove to a nearby McDonald's and slept it off. The lover I left behind was a movie about a talking dog that I had the great privilege of working on for free as a volunteer production assistant. And that was my first industry job in 2006. Since then, I have edited dozens of films, television shows, commercials, music videos. I have made it, but I deeply believe there's a better way. I'm Janis Vogel. I'm a film and television producer and editor. I'm the co-founder of the Blue Collar Post Collective, and I'm also a certified life coach, which means I help my clients go from where they are now to where they want to be. And I'm also a certified mentor. I'm also the mother of one Spitfire 4-year-old named Zima. I got into this business because I wanted to be creative every day. I asked around about what it would take to make it in this industry, and I was willingly indoctrinated into a culture of fear. Pay your dues, work your ass off, say yes to everything that comes your way, and be the hungriest person in the room. Let's archive those terms. It's a time of great upheaval in our industry between the strikes and the ongoing effects of the pandemic and the state of the world. And that's why it's such a great time for us to assess what needs to change. We are storytellers and we make films, but we're also telling the story of this industry as we live it. We create resonance and connection with others as our job, and yet the culture of this industry so often creates a disconnect amongst each other and within ourselves. That's why it's so powerful and important for us to gather in community as we are today. So thank you so much for being here. I'd like to invite us all to participate in a conversation that's beginning to take hold. Paul Rogers edited the film Everything Everywhere All at Once and won the Oscar for Best Film Editing. And he said, there's a problem in our industry that the more you kill yourself for a movie, the braver you are, and that's bullshit. We can do our jobs and we can live our lives, and the more fully we can live our lives, the better we can do our jobs. And I couldn't agree more. So let's redefine bravery. Let's redefine what it takes to make it in this industry. I believe that in order to be creative, we need to take care of our greatest assets, our bodies, our minds, ourselves. So let's reclaim our creative freedom by setting powerful, energizing, kind boundaries without ever saying the word boundary. In my full creative freedom coaching program, we go through all of these 10 topics and more. And today we're going to go through the first 5: protecting creativity, defining boundaries, tuning into basic needs, boundary power tools, and scripting boundaries. So I want to preface this all to say that I do understand the limits of our power. We have very little influence over the industry at large, less over our management, and some over our team, but we have the most influence over ourselves. And so I really am here to inspire us to explore what little bit of power we can reclaim in that sphere of influence that we do have. In 2018, I added the title Mother to my resume. And that was a huge turning point in my own relationship with boundaries. I wish that I had these tools sooner, but boundaries kind of seemed optional before I had a child. I learned to take care of myself the hard way. I will never forget the moment that I had my 3-month-old baby strapped to my chest, and I was under the New York City subway when I received a phone call from a producer offering me what like 3 months earlier would have been my dream job. And my child wasn't even taking a bottle at the time, and I've never been so torn. But ultimately, I said no to the job. And it was one of the most terrifying no's I've ever said. But 7 months later, I got the same call, and I was invited to work on the same job, and I took it. And it was that moment that I really learned that saying no wasn't going to burn down my whole career. Since then, the jobs that I've said no to have created a star-studded resume of no's. And yet, against so many odds, I am still here. And I am working on projects that I love with people I love. I truly believe that we are all caregivers of ourselves first, and that when we dare to take care of ourselves, the creative results are infinite. So let's define creativity. I see creativity as a river. It's like our life force. I like to expand the notion of creativity to include how we move through our lives, how we move through the day. Whether we're editing a scene or building a spreadsheet, we can do these things with this quality of creative flow. So I would love for everyone to take a moment to reflect back on a job that was really in alignment with you, where you really felt that creative energy, and think about your routines, your environments, your movements, the human beings surrounding you, and what elements allowed you to be your most creative. And you can either share some of those in the chat or write them down for yourself, or just think about them. Those kind of create your creative values, and that's what we're here to protect. When we define boundaries, we can define it really simply as something that indicates a border or a limit. Boundaries are also what you will and will not do, and what you do and do not want. Sometimes boundaries, the word has sort of a negative connotation, but ultimately it's not about begging people to change or convincing people how to treat you. It's really navigating what you will do and what you won't do based on the environment around you. So I like to mix up the metaphors a bit and think of boundaries as the cellular membrane. And what I love about this analogy is that cellular membranes don't just let everything in or everything out, and they don't block everything out or in either. So there are 3 kinds of boundaries. There are porous boundaries where you're saying yes to everything. And then there are rigid boundaries where you're creating a wall and keeping everything out. But ultimately, ideally, we allow certain things in and certain things out. Our inner resources include our energy, our time, our money, our creativity. And when we have healthy boundaries, we can say yes to the things that serve us and no to the things that don't. So bringing it back to that river, if the banks of the river are our boundaries, what I love about that metaphor is that the edges of rivers are where like all the good stuff is. That's where all the resources are, all the food that animals come and eat. It's when we see boundaries as opportunity for resourcing ourselves, that empowers us to set them. And it empowers us to say yes to things that energize us and no to things that deplete us. And so that brings me to, in order to set boundaries, we need to understand our needs. And of course, in this industry, it has been so normalized to set our needs aside in the service of whatever we're working on, and in the service of the team, and in the service of the culture. And so understanding our needs and desires allows us to determine what those healthy boundaries look like. We often don't want to set boundaries because we're going to come off as needy. And really, we are all humans. One of my favorite coaches, Yana Robinson, always talks about the fact that we are really just big plants. And I also am like, we work in film, and we wouldn't want to make a film or see a film where the characters didn't have needs. And these things inspire me to acknowledge and validate my own needs. We're often asked to give up our personal lives at the beginnings of jobs. And I think it's so important for us to determine what is our personal life and what are our basic needs, so that we don't give up both. Because diminishing our needs really doesn't work. They end up just knocking louder and coming back to us in the form of stress, chronic pain, illness, which ends up really making our work suffer. And so I love this way of working with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have our basic needs: air, food, water, sleep, which cultivates our safety, which cultivates our belonging, which cultivates our respect for ourselves and others, and ultimately cultivates our creativity. And so creativity is both a result of these, and it regenerates our ability to understand them. When we dare to meet our needs, we cultivate an environment in which creativity can thrive. I love this quote by Louis Cozolino, that we are not the survival of the fittest, we are the survival of the nurtured. And I truly believe that wise managers understand this, and many more need to come to understand it. But when we can begin to acknowledge it for ourselves, then we can start shifting the culture of this industry 1 degree at a time, one choice at a time, one breath at a time, one sip of water at a time, one walk at a time. I have created some of my best work after taking a long walk, and it took me like 10 years in this industry to give myself permission to do that. So in exploring creativity and needs and the relationship between those, I don't know why, but with this slide, I always think of George Lucas and Star Wars, and like what his environment must have been like in order for him to like just, come up with outlandish ideas that are loved by the world for generations to come. And when we meet our needs, we develop that self-trust that's needed to take creative leaps. And I was mind blown myself when I understood that self-trust isn't about making it from one side of the cliff to the other, but it's about knowing that if I fall straight through, I'm going to have my back and be kind to myself. So, it's accepting ourselves as whole humans with a full range of needs and desires and emotions that cultivates that trust and that safety to take creative leaps. One of my favorite psychologists, Gay Hendricks, talks about unlocking creativity requires leaving the zone of the known. But how do we leave the zone of the known if we're in a state of fear? So when we cultivate that safety, that's when we achieve creative flow. And in order to cultivate that safety, we need to set boundaries. But they are so hard to set, especially in a culture where it's normalized to cross our boundaries, encouraged to cross our own boundaries. In this industry and in our culture at large, the reason it's so hard to set a boundary, there are 4 reasons that I've come up with here. There's probably more. But number 1 is we are conditioned to go above and beyond. And even that term, above and beyond, connotes that crossing our boundaries is something to aspire to. So we're sort of gaslighted into thinking like, is there even a problem here? We're looking around at our coworkers like, they seem fine. My back is hurting, but everyone else is sitting in their chairs. So that first sticking point, is there even a problem? And second, if we do acknowledge there's a problem, there's a sense like, I shouldn't be feeling this. There's like a couple G words that come to mind here. Number 1 is, we should be grateful for our amazing jobs. We can be grateful for this industry and want to change it. In fact, it is my stubborn love for this industry that has me here talking about wanting to change it. The second is, I feel so guilty about asking for a 15-minute break, or I've already asked for a day off last week and I feel so guilty asking for another one. And there's a lot of guilt that we can't just shed with a flick of a switch, but when we acknowledge it in an open space, it begins to shrink. So we also have to ask ourselves, is this guilt the guilt that we feel in our own value system, or is it the value system of the industry that is creating that guilt? And that's how we know that if it's the system that's creating that guilt, that is discomfort that we can push through. Take the risk, ask for the break, see what the response is, see the love that comes back your way, and feel encouraged to ask for another break, feel the resistance that comes your way, and perhaps work on finding new collaborators in the future. Nothing I say today is to place the full responsibility on us to change this system, but it is taking those little risks to push through discomforts and find out that somebody celebrates you taking care of yourself, and that those are the people that we should aspire to be as managers and aspire to work with as colleagues. So the third thing is, what should I say? We don't have any practice in setting boundaries because we don't learn it in elementary school. Maybe we learn it from our parents. If it's easy for us, then we might have had good modeling. But from what I'm seeing, the past generations have really screwed us on average. But anyway, that's for another day. Not knowing what to say. In fact, I think that people do know what to say, but there is such fear about what people will think. So if you just say, I don't want to do this, or I'm leaving right now for a walk, what's the reaction going to be? It is very, very human to fear rejection and fear reaction. And it makes sense that we want to belong, and we understand that the harder we work, the sooner we'll be promoted, perhaps. We want to protect our reputation and our recommendations. The system has created rewards for crossing our boundaries. And because we are so programmed from the beginnings of our careers and the beginnings of our upbringing to go for those rewards of crossing our own boundaries, we haven't tried setting boundaries and seeing the rewards that come from those. I was really shocked when I started taking more breaks and saw that I was able to more quickly solve creative problems in my editing and enjoy the process more. When we cultivate this self-trust by setting boundaries, we also end up being more trusted by our team. I heard a producer say, I asked, I hired this assistant editor, and they said that they prefer not to answer emails on weekends unless it's an emergency. And I emailed them one weekend and they didn't respond, and I couldn't believe it. But after that, I also was like, you know what, I'm not going to email them anymore on weekends, and I'd like to enjoy my weekends more. It's like small decisions we make can actually impact our higher ups in a positive way sometimes. So what makes it easier to set a boundary? Validating ourselves, creating an environment of curiosity. Curiosity is one of the best antidotes to fear. When we're fearing setting a boundary, let's poke at that. Let's be like, what's my editor going to say when I want to take a walk? What's management going to say when I say I can come on to this job, but there is this 1 week that I can't work because of a wedding? Let's allow for discussion. Imagine that a discussion will take place, that no boundary we set will ultimately burn a bridge. And if it does, then it is a bridge that was never going to be supportive of us. Knowing what to say is helpful, and we're going to talk about that today. And then one of the most powerful things is to assume you are respected. Assume that when you dare to take care of yourself, you will be respected more by yourself and by others. It takes practice to change these patterns. And I love what Brené Brown talks about when she talks about grit versus grind. Grind is when we say yes out of fear of what others will think, and grit is when we say no to make space for a better yes. And so this talk is not about like working less hard and caring less about climbing our career ladder. It's really about how can we climb it with yeses that empower us, and through taking care of ourselves and through living a life of grit over grind, making choices that energize us. When I'm faced with a decision, I used to poll the entire universe on whether I should say yes or to this job or yes to that job. And I was offered this Apple TV assistant editing job some years back. And it was like so great on paper, but it was just not the time in my life where I could take a show with that many VFX shots. And I asked everybody what I should do, and I really didn't get any answers. And what I do now is I take the decision and I try on the yes and I try on the no, and that can be for a day or a moment, and really feel how that feels in your body, and practice honoring that, and practice trusting that when you say no, a better yes is going to find you. So let's dive into the actual meat of boundaries. I like to divide boundaries into internal and external boundaries. Internal being how we enact our boundaries with ourselves, external being how we enact our boundaries with others. When we think about boundaries, we often think about telling other people what they can't do and setting rules, and it feels like this unwieldy and mean or rude act. but there are powerful things that we can do in setting boundaries with ourselves first that end up helping us change our perspective on what boundaries are and how we can use them with others. So one of the biggest shifts that I made in my life over the last few years is how I speak with myself. And honestly, this was inspired by parenting. I was like, oh, a child, how do I talk to a child? And I realized that in order to speak the way I want to speak with my child as a parent, I have to speak with myself in that way. It's sort of a reparenting act. And so internal boundaries, how we speak to ourselves, what we are willing to do and on what terms, how we behave when our boundaries are crossed. So yeah, the first thing is, how do we speak to ourselves when we make a mistake? Do we beat ourselves up, or do we have compassion for ourselves? It feels like, oh, I'm going to be less likely to make a mistake if I'm really mean to myself and punish myself for this mistake. But science is finally proving through some amazing studies on compassion that speaking kindly with yourself and having compassion with yourself will speed up the repair process with yourself and make you less likely to make future mistakes and help you learn. And so this shift in how we speak with ourselves, literally adding a different voice. I'm always sort of like, okay, people are talking about compassion and people are talking about different modalities, and being kind to yourself or being mindful. But I truly have broken it down to like, create a second voice that responds to the other voice. You want to shift a pattern, it's about adding a voice. It's not about changing your thoughts or why am I thinking this again? It's really about like, oh, I'm going to add a second person into my patterning who is kind and says, oh, reminder, I'm not speaking to you that way anymore. And this creates a new neural pathway that feeds into your creative river and enhances that creative force. So, external boundaries. Having these internal boundaries with yourself, decisions that you make for yourself. I am going to take a break. I am going to drink water every day. I'm going to do these things to take care of myself. I'm going to say no when it feels like a no. Allows you to practice that with yourself and then bring that to the outside world. So external boundaries are how we and when we communicate with others, boundaries to others, what we are willing to do and on what terms, and how we behave towards others when boundaries are crossed. So the best time to set a boundary is at the beginning of a relationship, at the beginning of a job, during a job interview. Being a parent, I have more boundaries than I did before becoming a parent, although I think that we deserve to have boundaries no matter what our life situation is. But I come to a job, with a discussion about my availability and my responsibilities in my childcare. And so sometimes you'll have to set a boundary in the middle of a job, and that can be really uncomfortable. But once again, that's pushing through that discomfort to shift something. When you set the boundaries at the beginning of a job, you are laying the groundwork for when times get stressful later on down the line. So talking about some of your needs right in the beginning will set the tone for taking care of yourself later on and preventing burnout later on. And it just allows your team and management to know that these things are important to you and they're going to be unique for everyone. After a job is over, it's a great time to reflect on what boundaries might have supported you more. And it's also important to set a boundary quite soon after you notice that it's been crossed. And this is tricky because when we haven't been programmed to recognize our boundaries or when they've been crossed, it can take sometimes like a week to be like, oh my gosh, that person said that to me, that I'm still thinking about it. And so setting the boundary soon after it's been crossed is really important. And here's how to recognize when your boundary has been crossed. A lot of us don't think of setting a boundary or don't recognize the boundary it needs to be set until we're in the rage triangle. And so I find it really cool to understand the trajectory to rage so that we can recognize it sooner. And some of these words are inspired by a book about nervous system regulation called Call of the Wild by Kimberly Ann Johnson. And I like to call these like emotional cousins. So it might be standard to go from irritation to anxiety to rage, but some of us experience confusion or worry or an increase in niceness, like suddenly we're like on guard and like being a little bit nicer. That can be a sign that our boundaries are starting to be crossed and that we might be in a place where something needs to shift. And if we can recognize it at that early stage where we're still cool, calm, and collected, we're regulated, we're just like, ooh, I'm doing that thing where I'm being nicer to everyone. Like, let me see what needs to happen here. Maybe I am neglecting a need of mine in this space. So some of us might move to anxiety. Some of us might move to fear or apathy. Like, oh, I'm just like not that into this job anymore. Like that can be a sign that a boundary is being crossed. And then that rage can look like an outburst, or it can look like a shutdown. It can look like collapse. It can look like panic. It can, once again, look like appeasing, like super trying to protect yourself by forcing somebody to be nice to you by appeasing them. Or imposter syndrome can be a sign that boundaries are being crossed. And it's just so normal to feel all of these things. And when we can recognize them, then we can set boundaries sooner. And when we recognize some of these things, we can really like name them to tame them, I like to say. So this really leads to the big topic of toxic workplaces. This is a list by the psychologist Nedra Tawwab. It's just some of the things that she defines as a toxic workplace. And what really struck me is that the first three are pretty much normalized in our industry: working long hours, not being paid for additional hours, being mandated to complete more work in a limited time frame. And what comes to mind for me with these first three is really like, there is the rampant exploitation in our industry, but there's also just like when we make a mistake and then we think we need to work additional hours for free because we're the ones who made the mistake. Well, it's like managers take human error into account. And when we mess up, we can still be paid and valued for our work. Of course, there's always something to learn, and we can learn it much better if we take care of ourselves and set the necessary boundaries to help us do our best work. And so then the last four: negative communication among peers or superiors, being bullied, being sexually harassed, being mistreated based on race or physical ability or sexual orientation. Those are all areas where it's like rigid boundaries come into play. Getting the support to have somebody removed from a team or removing ourselves from that situation. It's going to be, there's no need for porous boundaries in those situations. I'm thinking of this one time I was torn between two jobs. I've been torn between two jobs quite a lot. And it took me so long to make the decision of which job to take in this situation. And now I'm like, I clearly would have made a different decision, but I base my choices on, do I feel safe? Am I going to be respected? Is the management going to honor my needs? And which environment is going to allow me to do my best work? And that the decision would have been a no-brainer today. So, if somebody raises their voice or uses demeaning language, I remove myself from that situation. I set a strong boundary. I hang up the phone. It's no longer on me to take care of that person or their needs or their emotions. It's on me to take care of myself and really allow room for myself to process and then come back to the situation or get the support I need to handle that situation later. And so I would love to share a story about a client of mine who was too legit not to quit a job, but it was very challenging to leave this situation. And it's so normal for there to be fears when we have to leave a job, especially in the beginning of our career. We're told we need to say yes to everything and stick it out and power through, and all of these little cheerful phrases that can keep us stuck in really, really challenging situations. There were swirling fears of like, maybe it's me, or I'm irreplaceable. I'm leaving them in a lurch. And what about my reputation? And will this be my last job in the industry? Am I burning my career down? There's so many times where I have thought, oh, I'm going to burn down my career if I make this choice. And these are real fears. I'm not going to say that they are anything but real fears. But it was a very powerful process to help guide her in untangling these fears and coming up with a slow and careful strategy to leave in the most honest, but also the most self-protected way, and to leave in a time frame that made sense, and really like take it one fear at a time, and not allow all of those fears to overwhelm and keep her stuck in this job. She found that choosing herself in this situation allowed her to leave the job and say no to something to make room for a better yes. And I was so delighted to hear about some of the amazing creative endeavors that she embarked on after getting out of this demeaning situation. It was truly amazing. And so I really want to help people coming into this industry understand that they don't need to say yes to everything. They need to say yes to the right things. And like, you want to get your foot in the door, but it's at the beginning of your career that you have the opportunity to get your foot in the right door. And even in the middle or any part of our career, we can start honing in on getting our foot in the right door. Sometimes we feel like that door that we really want to get into is like far too magical for us to get our foot into. And so we take all of these learning opportunities wherever we can. And I do understand like the need to take whatever comes your way in order to survive. But there's a dance and there's a strategy. And I am so grateful to be prioritizing working for managers who are kind, respectful, and honor my boundaries. It's been truly surprising to find them and continue working with them. I really think that instead of us fearing our reputations, that managers can start upping their game on the reputation they want to have with us. I had to ask to miss a few meetings on a multi-million, $100 million TV show recently. And I was nervous to ask, but when I did, I got a very surprising response. My manager said, "I am happy to accommodate, but man, do I wish people had higher standards for their jobs and managers. It shouldn't be such a big thing to say, I'm not going to be able to make it to 2 15-minute meetings this week. I'm hoping to normalize allowing people to be real, actual humans that aren't held hostage by their jobs." So she said all of that, and it was so incredible, so validating to hear that as I embark on this journey of exposing the problems in our industry. To have a manager say that was truly a gift, and I'm so grateful to be able to share it with you, because we can find those managers. They are out there, and every other manager should be aspiring to that kind of language and that kind of safety for us to do our best work in. And so this is the list of boundaries that I slide across the desk in a job interview. Just kidding. But I did enjoy creating this list. It turned into sort of like a list of affirmations. It feels really good to read it. I divided my boundaries into physical, emotional, energetic, and communicative needs. And I may not get all of these on every job, but this is the standard. And this is what I aspire to. And when I do cross my own boundaries, it allows me to have a conversation with myself. I've already made these agreements with myself, and therefore I can say, hey, I know I made this agreement with you, but I really love this scene and I want to work on it on the weekend. So we're going to do that, and we're going to take a break another time. And negotiating with yourself honestly is so much more nurturing than denying our needs and pretending we don't have them, and I got this, I'm pushing through. So yeah, I won't read them all, but you can receive these slides after this and reach out to me anytime as well. As an editor, these are some of the boundaries that I set as an editor and as an assistant editor, and I found this conversation very interesting. So I will communicate permissions to my assistant. I will say to my assistant, hey, I'm going to work until late at night, but please leave whenever you're ready. I really love saving my assistant's energy for those times where it's really, really crunch time, and not having them sit at their desks when there's nothing to do, so to speak. I set expectations early. I communicate about slow and busy times, and I don't do other people's jobs. I won't import that music track, even though it seems easier. And as an assistant, I will ask my editor and managers about priorities, that sense of oh my gosh, they're asking me for another thing. I understand what it's like to feel oh, it's, don't they remember they already asked me to do 10 things? How are they asking me to do another thing? But it's, we can mitigate that as assistants by saying okay, you've asked me to do these 3 things. Can you tell me which one is the priority? Because I'm not going to be able to do all of these in one day. And then there's managing up, which one of my favorite coaches, Sarah Peck, talks about, managing upwards. As assistant editors, we have so many organizational skills and so many leadership skills. And oftentimes, editors might not have that bandwidth, or they might not have that skill. And so it's up to us to sort of let them know what our needs are and how we can organize something better and how we can communicate something more streamlined. And assuming we are respected by our editors is important in that sense. And that can be a really a hard conversation to begin to have. But once again, editors that respect us will value that in us. So that also leads to pushing past guilt to advocate for your needs. I celebrate it when my assistant eats healthy food and takes a break and is taking care of themselves. And I try to model that as well, because I know that it will come in handy later when things get challenging. And so, how to talk about boundaries, what to say, how do I say it? When the stakes feel so high, it can be so hard to think of what to say. And so I like to start this section off by saying the shortest boundary is no. And no, I mean, it's one of the first words we learn, and toddlers love it, and they feel judged at all when they say it. They love it. They love all the reactions they get for saying it. So of course we want to soften the blow, and that's why I've created this formula. I think the reason we fear saying our boundaries is so often that we think someone's going to think we're ungrateful or lazy or somehow not in integrity. And it's the farthest thing from the truth. For some, they're going to question our values. And so I like to just nip that in the bud and come right out and say, I'm really excited about this project. Just front load the value that you are concerned about. I'm so grateful to be on this job. I know that we have a million things to do, but so value first, and then your need. I need to take this Friday off for my sister's wedding. And then, there's that fear of, well, I'm going to leave them in a lurch. Here's the solution. The solution is I've asked somebody to fill in for me. And then adding your willingness to discuss, to just create that space around what you're saying so that you can mitigate that fear of like, oh, I'm asking for too much, or I'm asking for something inconvenient. And that fear of disappointing, I think it's often sometimes it's not like burning down our whole career, but just that tinge of disappointment or that tinge of embarrassment that can really balloon into a big blocker of setting boundaries. And so just creating that, I'm totally willing to discuss, like, how is this landing with you? Let's talk about it. One of the other most important aspects of a boundary is to keep it short. And the reason that you want to keep it short is because clarity is kind, and also because you are probably going to need to repeat your boundary. And one of the hardest things is setting the boundary, but it can be even harder to hold the boundary. I keep telling them, and they keep doing the same thing. If that's the case, then we have to create a consequence and decide, what are we going to do? That is the work of a boundary. It's deciding what we will do if the boundary is not met. So make it short, make it repeatable. And also, one of my favorite rules for myself is choosing like one reason. I need to take a break. Maybe you need to take a break for a million reasons, but just choosing one that is understandable, that you feel safe sharing. The more reasons you give feels like the more reasons you're putting into the bank to validate your need, but it's actually watering it down somehow. It's counterintuitive, but it's just true. I've tested it way too many times, and one excuse will do. One reason will really keep your boundary strong, powerful, and like show your self-respect. So here are some ideas that I had about scenarios when you're asked to work through dinner. These all sort of take on that formula of value plus need plus solution. It's important to me to do all I can do to meet our deadline. I will be more effective if I take a dinner break. I'll take 30 minutes at 7 p.m. and export thereafter. Return, wait for response. The editor says, of course, exclamation point. Wow, shocked. This is so much easier than I expected. And that's obviously not always going to be the case. They might say, actually, can you just push, put that export out now and take dinner after? Like, allow for the discussion, take the risk so that you can see how it lands and go from there. Wanting to have a weekly appointment. How many people are not going to therapy that they desperately need because they don't feel like they can have a weekly appointment with their job? I really want to shift that in this industry. Normalize that we have a weekly appointment or two that we can work into our schedule. I have a weekly appointment. This will be like at the beginning of a job. I'll say, I have a weekly appointment on Thursdays at 1 p.m. If there's a conflict, I will be sure to reschedule or find coverage while I'm away. Just setting that precedent really gives you the freedom to set that boundary. Once again, someone raising their voice during a meeting, you can, if there's room for your expression, then you can say, I'm going to take a moment. Let's revisit this conversation when we're both calm. And if not, your body is a boundary. You allow certain things in, you allow certain things out. And if someone is speaking to you in a way that hurts you, it's time to remove your body from that situation. And that is setting a boundary. Wanting to take a break during a slow period. I find that this break topic is just really important because I feel like if we can shift the industry culture into normalizing the 15-minute break, it's somehow still feels more normal to take a cigarette break than a breath of fresh air. And I really hope that can catch up to the culture. So I'd like to step out for 30 minutes, but please let me know if you need anything before I leave. Sometimes I feel like I've already said that today, or I shouldn't ask for another break. But these, especially in the work from home situation that has created an even more isolating, can I ask for this kind of environment? It allows for a moment of connection with your editor, and it shows them like that you're a moving, living human being with needs. And so it's really, really powerful to take that break for yourself and to see it as an opportunity to connect with your colleagues, as uncomfortable as it might feel. We practice and it gets easier. So I sat next to a CEO on a plane and I asked her, why do executives need coaching? And she said, because the things that help us get to the top aren't the things that help us stay there. And once we grind ourselves to the top, suddenly we need our humanity back so that we can connect with our colleagues, we can come up with creative solutions. And so I really want to preserve our humanity as we rise in this industry, rather than losing it and then suddenly needing it later. We've needed it all along. And so, yeah, now we understand a little bit more about setting boundaries and how that results in our creative freedom. Boundaries are not meant to keep us small. They are meant to make it safe for us to expand, to seek joy, to geek out, to experiment, to focus, to play, to flow. And that will allow us to do our best work. So let's dare to take care of ourselves and let the industry adjust. The creative results will be mind-blowing. I would love to hear from some of you. And if you would like to work with me, please reach out. Here are all of my ways to be found in the interwebs. And thank you so much for being here.